something that seems very simple that we point out where there needs to be a correction or an adjustment made or clarification, it's loaded with a theological understanding that we now see we're in a disagreement about. The issue of gay marriage, the issue of being gay, period, the issue of abortion. They're put into little bite-sized nuggets on television, on the news. But there are volumes of theological points of view in everything that's being said. So John's disciples come to Jesus and they ask him, why? Why aren't your disciples fasting like we are? Jesus responds and deals very, very clearly, because one of the purposes for fasting he addresses here about mourning. That's another purpose of fasting. There's grief, there's distress, and in the mourning over the distress and over the grief, particularly there in Israel, fasting was the way to work your way through the mourning, to work your way through the grief before God, to get answers from God. And typically the answer that was expected from God was a mighty deliverance that no one could deny. John is leading. His disciples are with him. Their expectations about what his leadership is about is all in this question about fasting. Why? As we fast and pray, God's going to bring to pass what we're believing him to do. We're a part of this ministry. We're mourning over the mess that's going on over in Israel. We're in grief about what's happening in our country. That's what they're saying. And we're fasting about it. And your guys don't even fast. In other words, we see this from one perspective. Why aren't they fasting? You can see we're being oppressed by the Romans. You see the mess we're dealing with. Why aren't your guys fasting? It's very theological. It's deep. So Jesus' response is, when the bridegroom is with you, is that a time for mourning? A wedding's about to take place. Do we mourn in those kinds of times and seasons? Something great is about to happen. At this point, I'm the bridegroom. We're getting ready for something really joyous. Timing-wise, that's a problem. They don't get it. This service today is typical of that. Okay? Let me hurry. And we'll come back and share more on this a little later. But listen what else Jesus says. But the days will come when the bridegroom will be taken away from them. And then they will fast. In other words, he's saying, I'm the bridegroom. The day's going to come when I leave. And in that season, they will engage in seeking the face of God, coupled with fasting, because I won't be here to answer their questions and to deal with them in a physical form. This is serious. I notice what Jesus goes on to say. No one puts a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. Something new is happening here. For the patch pulls away from the garment and the tear is made worse. They sew it in, but because of the newness and the strength of the fibers, it causes the weakness of the older garment to rip under pressure. Then he goes on to say, nor do they put new wine into old wine skins. What was a wine skin? A wine skin was basically animal skin, sometimes a calf or a goat, portion of them. was taken and cut off with the legs and so forth and tied up on the ends. If I had a picture, I'd show it to you. We're dealing with this early part of this month with us as leaders, or last month in September. The hair is taken off, it's skinned, so to speak, and wine is poured in. When a wine skin is new, because it's flesh, it's called a bottle, but because it's flesh, when a wine skin is new, it's very flexible. When the new wine goes into a new wine skin, the molecules are still moving very fast. And so every portion of that bottle that it goes into, it adjusts to the movement and the dynamics of this new wine. As wine ages, it settles and it doesn't move as vigorously as it used to. And the same thing happens to the wine skin. It settles and it gets hard and it gets adjusted in whatever shape it was in the last time before it moved out of its flexibility into its permanent stage. Some wineskins could be taken and you could catch it beforehand, and they would put water and oil on them to make it more flexible. It would never really go back to its newness, but it would become more flexible. But you could inevitably, no matter how much oil or water was put on it, it could not come out of that hard state. And so it had to be discarded. And for new wine, if you put new wine in it anyway, it was unable to adjust, and so it would burst. And new wine would be spilled. That's what Jesus warns about later. Very quickly. What we're seeing here is that God uses Jesus to say to the disciples of John, who are kind of in there spiritually, in terms of seeing what the role is of the leader that they're serving, and as far as seeing what it is that God wants him to do, and they're there supporting that with fasting and prayer, and then they run into the person that the ministry of John was leading to. They run into the very individual and the move of God that John was leading to, was preaching about. They run into it. And when they run into it, they find out something that they wasn't ready for, even though they were doing all that fasting and all that praying. They found out that the wineskin that they were in was no longer suitable for what they were being prepared to go into. And that in order for them to be able to move on with what God wanted to do with them, they would have to receive a new wineskin.